I want to talk about moving averages. Hey, how's it going, Steven? And the thing about moving averages is people tend to forget some of the key points about what they're looking at. It's really important when you're using any indicator, whether it's a moving average, whether it's an RSI or a MACD, that you understand what the indicator is calculating and that you understand the nuances involved in that indicator, because there's different types, there's subsets of those things. You can have oscillating certain types of indicators. You can have a simple moving average or an exponential moving average, and we're going to find out in a moment that the TCL moving averages are actually simple. There's a simple moving average and there's a couple pivot point moving averages. So I know some of you here have heard this before. Some of you are aware of these moving averages, but I've got a couple of questions from people about the TCL moving averages specifically. So I just wanted to take a night to kind of recover them, and maybe this will probably go into the foundations course to just give people a little extra clarification. So the two types of moving averages that we use for our TCL moving averages: simple moving average and pivot point moving average. A simple moving average is called a simple moving average because it just calculates one average of a range of prices. Scott using the same moving average? Yes, Scott uses the same moving averages in his Forex and his stocks. Brett says, you also need to learn to close a percentage of your trade when you hit targets. Yes, that's true. So going back to moving averages, so a simple moving average calculates the average of a range of prices, usually closing prices. Okay, so all it does is it takes the closing prices of the past number of days that are equal to the period you're looking at, and it takes the average. So if you're looking at a 100-day simple moving average, by default, typically, and you can change this if you know how to go in and change it slightly to opening or middle of the day prices. But by default, usually the simple moving average is calculated by taking the last 100 days of closing prices, adding them all together, and dividing by 100. What happens then is then you get 1 point on your line, your simple moving average for the day. And every day that you get a new close candle, it'll calculate the next moving average, and the line moves. It goes to the next point. Over time, as more days occur, the moving average amount changes. That value of the last 100 days closing prices added together divided by 100 changes as you use different days closing prices to calculate the new moving average. With me so far? That's pretty straightforward, I think. Now, a pivot point is slightly different. A pivot point is typically by itself is a moving, it's an indicator that's used to determine a trend in the market. Okay, now this is not the same thing as a pivot point moving average, but this concept ties into a pivot point moving average. So what they say here is that the pivot point itself is the average of the high, low, and closing price from the previous trading day. Okay, so the average of the high, the low, and the closing price from the previous trading day. That would be a single pivot point. Okay, now keeping with that concept, a pivot point moving average does nearly the same thing a moving average does. But instead of using, it says right here, instead of just using the closing price, a pivot point moving average takes the high price, the low price, and the closing price for a given candle and divides it by 3. That's the one data point out of however many periods you have in your moving average calculation. So if I'm looking at a 100-day pivot point moving average, it's going to take the last 100 candles, and for each candle, it's going to take the high, the low, and the closing, and then it's going to divide it by 3. It's going to do that 100 times, and then it's going to take all of those 100 values, add them together, divide by 100, and that's your moving average point for the day. Now, you have to kind of think about the consequences. When you're doing just the closing price of a candle, you're going to get, your data is going to be a little bit less smooth. That's the nicest way I can say it. It's going to be a little bit more choppy. The point of a pivot point moving average is to smooth out the line you're looking at compared to a simple moving average by taking into account volatility. So in crypto, we can have a very wide difference between the high price, the low price, and the closing price for a day. I mean, it can vary 40% in a single day. So if you just take the closing price and calculate, you're going to get a significantly different data point than, sorry for clicking on the wrong one again, than if you take all three of those candle values, the high, the low, and the closing, average that, and then use the average of all 100 of those values together. It's going to end up in a smoother line. I'm going to read a little bit what it says here. It says, pivot point moving average is one of the more popular, widely used indicators. It's been developed to smoothen the market noise and show the trend more clearly. The goals are achieved exactly in the same way in the case of a moving average indicator. The difference is the source price used. So we went over that. So let's take a look at that in action. And we'll start to kind of get an idea for what that means. Now, right now, you'll notice I don't have the moving averages on my chart. A lot of people in the past have struggled with copying and pasting the script over into the Pine editor, which we'll look at in a minute, to develop their own moving averages that are based on TCL's numbers. You don't need to do that anymore. All you need to do is go over to the indicators, type TCL, and there's the TCL moving averages. And in fact, it matches my script already, so it's tucked in there. And you might have to click on public library first. I was on built-ins. So if you're doing this for the first time yourself, click on public library, TCL, there's the moving averages. Now I've added them twice, I take it off once. Now, what do you notice? Right away, you see up here, there's a little bit of a hint as to what goes into these moving averages. You've got a 200-day. It's a simple moving average. We'll discuss why in a minute, but it uses the closing price. It's telling you right there. Cool, that's easy to understand. Then you've got the 44 and the 100 period moving averages. Now, right now I'm on the weekly chart, so technically this would be, 200 weeks, 44 weeks, 100 weeks. Whatever time frame you're on, the moving averages are going to calculate based on the number of candles in the value here. So this is 200 candles, 44 candles, 100 candles. The reason why these moving averages change on different time frames is because you're changing the value of the candles, and the calculation uses the candles. Okay, with me so far? So that makes sense that when you go to lower time frames, the moving averages are a lot more volatile because they're using a shorter period of time relative to a bigger time frame. 100 candles on the 1 hour chart is 100 hours of data to make each point in your moving average. But 100 candles on the day chart is 100 days of time calculated into each one of those data points. Kyle says, I had to script them myself. I wish I would have known. Yeah, and it's something weird where when it's on a website, you copy and paste the text, it tries to pull some of the code out of that text to preserve the formatting. You can fix the issue by copy and pasting to Notepad first. That removes formatting, and then from there, copy and paste into the script. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about this little Pine editor down here. In TradingView, this Pine editor allows you to put in your own custom scripts. Zach says, same here, except I thought they were simple moving averages. See, yeah, and now we're gonna look at this. I'm gonna open it because I've loaded it before. This is the text for the script. Now, if you hate reading code, fear not. I'm going to show you exactly how to figure this out really easily. Notice that the numbers up here are telling you the periods for your 3 moving averages. And in fact, these numbers are respective of the colors. So you can tell the 200, which comes first, is the red moving average. The 44, which comes next, is your blue moving average. And the 100 is your green moving average. That's why the blue is the most volatile. It swings the hardest because it's using the shortest amount of time in the past versus your red moving average uses 200 candles. It's going to be smoother. Over time, it's going to result in smoother action. Okay. Now, how do I figure out which is which? If you look down in the script here, you've got input. Here's your 200. You don't need to know what any of this code means. Just look at this 200 here. That lines up with your 200-day moving average, 200 period, I should say. And it says right here, title simple, SMA 1. And in fact, it's a simple moving average. And you can see here that it's calculating a simple moving average using the closing price. Okay? That's all this stuff right here in these few lines is related to that 200 simple moving average. You don't need to read the code to understand it. Just know that's what's going on. This script tells the program to do a 200 period simple moving average on the closing price of your candle. And in fact, I could change this to open and recalculate it and it'll change. I don't know if I can put them side by side. No, it's going to open a new one. I'm going to save this as TCL moving averages open price. Okay. Now I'm going to add an indicator here. Go away. My scripts. Here's my open moving average. Now, what do you notice? Did it change very much? No, it just overwrote. Now, why would that be? The reason why is because your time period is so large that the average smooths out to nearly the same place, whether you use the open or the closing price on a large time scale moving average. Let's see if it stays the same when we dig in lower. Can we find a time scale where the two reds come out slightly different? That 200 period might just be too big. Nope. Now, if you were to sit around and experiment with this, and you were to play with it until you got it to the point where you were on a lower time frame moving average and you changed it from close to open, you would very likely see a slight difference. It's not going to be huge, but you'll see certain areas like on the swing where it peaks out a little and goes back in. That's the only difference. So people want to obsess about whether open or close makes a difference because it changes the time. It's really not that big a deal. However, the beauty of a pivot point moving average is you don't have to choose open or close. You can just take the high, the low, and the close, or the high, the low, and the open. It won't matter though, because taking the high, the low, and this third data point and dividing by 3, it smooths out every single candle's data. It takes into account the swing of the candle by averaging its price. You find the middle of every candle, essentially, unless the close skews it a little bit, and that takes into account which direction it ends, okay? What you need to know about the 44 and the 100 is that if you can't remember, it's right here. It tells you in the title, pivot point moving average. And if you're not sure, you can see that right here, this period 1 and 2 both have a pivot, high, low, close, divided by 3. You now know that a pivot point moving average is taking those 3 values and dividing by 3. So I can look at this and go, these two, the 44 and the 100, are my pivot point moving averages. And this one right here is my simple moving average. It's a 200 period, and it's using, in this case, my script, because I changed it, the open, but the default TCL public one will say close, uses the closing price. So that hopefully gives you a little bit more information about moving averages and how we're using them. Zach says, what about applying the same principle to candlesticks? Are price averaged or pivot candles useful? The same principle to candlesticks. I mean, I think what you're getting at is the definition of a pivot point moving average. When you take the open, well, you take the high, the low, and the close, and you divide by 3, That's giving you basically the average price of the candlestick plus taking into account your closing price, which direction it ended. Okay. Price averaged or pivot candles, useful. I wonder if you're thinking about so you wouldn't have a candle, because when you take those 3 data points and divide by 3, you end up with a single data point. A candle has a high, a low, an open, and a close. Every single candle has 4 data points in it. And when you take 3 of those and divide it by 3 and get a single data point, all you're left with is a point that connects into a line, because every single one is a single point. If I lost a few of you that don't like math, don't worry about that. It's not critical. What's critical is understanding the significance of these moving averages and what they're gathering data from. Why does it take so long for this one to register this drop versus the 44 tells you pretty quickly? The 44, the shortest period, shows it starting. The next one confirms it, and the 200 seals the deal, because you're going further back in time with each one progressively. So this tells me in the most recent 44 candles, a change has occurred. The average of those last 44 candles is starting to decrease. So enough candles have moved to the opposite direction that my average of the last 44 is starting to come down. It's reached a peak. Well, it's not until later over here that my 100 period reaches a peak, because it has more moving against it in the past to take into account. Now, this is going to be a little tricky, but I really want to do this so that we can get a real good picture here. This point, this peak here, you know what? I'm going to do vertical lines. Let's make this real clear. We're getting to the nitty-gritty stuff. Here's a peak. There a peak. Everywhere a peak, peak. All right, my moving average is peaked. If I were to just look at this data point where the moving average peaked, we're talking 44 candles in the past. Bear with me here. This is going to be a little tedious, but we'll get through it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 20. I could just count back a month. Now I'm being silly because I'm on the day. I thought I was on the 4 hour for a second. So let me just look at the date. We've got the 17th of January. Go back a month. That's about 30 days. That would be the 17th of December. And we'll add another 14 days onto it. 17 minus 14, that's about 3. So about the 3rd of December. Ooh, and this is filling in my square here. So let me fix that for a second. That's painful to see. Give me my toolbar. There we go. Nope. Tricked me. There we go. Get out of here. There we go. Time tool cough. Shush cow. I'm trying to take a simple approach, but yes, you can also use the time tool. I just want to see the kind of mechanical approach here. I really want to do. No, you're fine. I'm not offended. I'm purposefully taking the time to be mechanical about it, because for a long time, this was how it had to be done, by hand. And I really want to get this point across. So this peak's here. We got to go back for this one 100 days. We're on the 8th of March. We'll go back 3 months and we'll add some days to it. There is a time tool for y'all that like to do that. January, February, March, that's 3 months. And then we will go back another 10 days. So I'll go back to about December 28th. Okay, so I'm looking at December 28th. Box in all this price action here. Oop. Okay. Now notice this peak, look how much smaller the space is to calculate this data point versus this one. 44 is just under half of 100. Notice how much further it lags. So by this logic, roughly, I'm going to do this roughly, we can double this and we'll get how far back the 200 period is going. And I'm going to chart box in my price data. Now let me, real quick, match the colors so it makes a little more sense for the visual people like me. Ha. So each time we reached a peak in our moving average, the smaller period of time being observed is going to give me a quicker turn. My lagging indicator is going to respond faster. Now look at the difference when I overlap. I don't want to perfectly overlap because I want you to be able to see the range that these have to work in to calculate. This is going to go all the way down to here. Okay, so at this point in time, when my blue moving average peaked, my blue moving average is taking into account only this data. Notice how much higher this data is compressed. It's in a much smaller range from top to bottom. The bottom to the top of this, I mean, that's a pretty good percentage, 92% from bottom to top. But compare that to the last 200 days, which takes into account almost 600% of price action difference from bottom to top. This is why my red moving average has only reached this high at this point. Watch as I move over time. Look what happens. The data moves up and gets compressed until eventually I reach the peak way later over here. And that only happens because now I've compressed all my data into this smaller space. And from that point, it never goes up again. It just goes down. Now, this is really hard to visualize using TradingView. You really have to kind of go into your conceptualization, your mind space, and really think about the consequences of the windows of time that each point on every single one of these moving averages is looking into. Essentially, what you're doing with a moving average is looking into the past period of time leading up to that point on the moving average. So the shorter period moving averages are looking into less of the past. And as we swing heavy in one direction or the other, they are more responsive because they get rid of the farther away data quicker. So they move up quicker. And the red moving average never gets all the way up there because it's going to be held down by all of the past. And as it peaks, it's already, we see the price action is swinging down against it. Zach says, I need MySpace for this? No, your headspace, not your MySpace. Go into your mind and close your eyes and visualize what's going on in these moving averages against the price action and really think about the calculation. This 201 is just taking a single point off of the past 200 candles. So not only is it doubly as large as the middle and almost 4 times as large as your first one, more than 4 times, it's also only using 1 data point per candle. So it's not got the whole picture as much as your pivot point ones, which are going to show you a little bit more of the data here. What you can start to do when you really understand these is you can come into scripts like this and you can change your pivot points into periods like the 200 period for your moving average. And you can see how that compares. I'm gonna do this again here. How that compares to the simple one. Let's see if I can get this on here. It may not have picked it up. I may need to go in and save it differently. Oh, no, you could see a little. A little. Look at that. Can you see it? Can you see the difference? My pivot point moving average is peaking out just alongside of it, and then it comes back in and follows. You only notice a difference, a significant difference on a larger one, when the data is swinging wildly. So that's why when you get to the 200s, You really don't need a pivot point that high. You're just looking for a larger trend. But when you get down onto those lower time frame moving averages, the smaller periods of time, if you try to simple moving average it versus doing a pivot point, it's not going to tell you the turns as quickly because it's not taking into account the volatility. There may be a simple moving average 50 in here. Is there? Maybe there's a 100. I don't know if I trust that one. I might be able to just do an SMA and tell it to do 100 on here, huh? There we go. Inputs. Here's where you can change the inputs, by the way. Nope, they're not going to give me that control in there. So I would really have to play down here and get it to go. So I don't want to confuse everyone with that right now. I think that's enough. I think that gives you a really good idea of what you're looking at when you're looking at a moving average and why these pivot points are so important and critical in crypto, because the pivot points are accounting for the volatility. Zach says that's why these pivot point averages are much more reliable when buying into a trend. My simple moving averages lag too much on the 44-100. Yes, Zach. The simple moving averages are going to give you confirmation in the big picture that the trend has indeed made that turn. But it doesn't help you much to know that here if you're trying to short back here. Right? And the same is true in reverse. But what it does tell you by the time you get here is, okay, this was a really good move because, yep, we're definitely going lower. By the time this turns and continues to go down, that's telling you that all the past 200 days of data is now trending down. The trend bend has been confirmed on this large 200 period moving average. But on these smaller pivot points, they're giving you clues. And in fact, you'll get false reversals on these smaller ones. And that's why you compare it to the green. You really, if this was a turn here, the green would have turned and confirmed and kept going, and the red would have probably flattened out and they would have started to cross. And in fact, you'll notice, look what happens down here. When price action finally turns, who's the first one out of the gate? Our shortest 44 period blue. And then our green confirms behind as it starts to turn a little bit later. They both cross over the red, which is a good sign. And then as we're about halfway through the swing, our red has made the curve and joins the other two. Taco says he likes to combo the 300 SMA with the TCL. That's cool. I like that. I would give that a try. You'd get an even smoother one that would lag a little bit further. Do something like that. Never go down as far, maybe. So that's really, it's up to you as a trader to really identify and begin to figure out which moving averages are most appropriate for your style of trading. Which ones tell you the information you need to know to confirm that what you got into was safe, or maybe you need to get out, or whatever it is that you're looking at. Zach says, do you use exponential moving averages, Mike? I personally don't. I've played with them before, but I'll tell you why. Because as long as I've been using the TCL moving averages, they've worked just fine. And my motto is keep it super simple. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You can play with EMAs, and if you find that they work for you to improve your results, if you're doing your journaling and you get to a trade, you say, you know what, I'm putting on the EMA, I'm going to see how it changes my thought process, and you use it for 10, 20, 30 trades and your results are getting better, use it. Absolutely. Roger says 60-20 cross on the 4-hour and 12-hour works great for me. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have identified the time frame that you trade on well, and you've identified certain signals in your moving averages that complement your trading plans and help you make more effective decisions with less emotion based on data that's being calculated over time, there's nothing wrong with that. The question is, does the TCL moving average work well in Forex and stocks as well as crypto? Do you change it, or are you using the same ones?
For me?
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean,
I don't. Yep, no.
I watch you do the charts, so I know the answer. It's not a trick question. It sounds like one, but
no.
The question essentially is, do you feel the need to change those three moving averages that you use well when you switch between Forex, stocks, and crypto?
No. Yeah, I mean, you could tweak them if you wanted to with crypto, and you could try to tweak them for the volatility and different things like that. But I don't trade with them, so you know, they're visuals for me, and every chart's different. And you know, no, I don't mess with them. I like them. If
And
it
I
ain't broke,
love that you said that, Scott.
yeah,
I
if it
don't
ain't broke,
trade
don't
with
fix it.
them.
Yeah,
Did you hear that? He says, I don't trade with them, but they are a good visual. You have a trading plan that's based on structure, it's based on sentiment, it's based on certain patterns and setups and fibs. Your moving averages are not for trading around, they're for complementing, confirming, identifying potential bends. That's what they're for.